On March 4, 2024, just after closing time in a small repair shop off the interstate, a late-model sedan rolled into my bay with a problem that did not make sense on paper. The driver was not angry. He was not panicked. He was confused. His fuel costs had quietly doubled. Same commute, same habits, no warning lights, no power loss. The car felt fine. Today, I am revealing why that sentence is the most dangerous clue of all, and the one hidden sensor that decides how much fuel you waste without ever warning you. I have heard this story hundreds of times. It always starts the same way. A driver assumes fuel prices went up, or winter blend fuel is to blame, or maybe the car is just getting old. What almost no one considers is that their engine is not actually in control of how much fuel it burns anymore. Not you, not your right foot, and not the engine itself. There is a single sensor that quietly tells your car how much fuel to waste or how much to save every second you are driving. The dangerous part is that when this sensor starts to fail, the car does not complain. It does not stall. It does not misfire. It does not throw a check engine light. In fact, the engine often runs smoother than normal. That is why drivers miss it. That is why this problem drains wallets instead of triggering alarms. As I pulled the car into the bay, everything sounded normal. Idle was steady. Throttle response was clean. No hesitation, no shaking. If you drove it around the block, you would swear nothing was wrong. But I have learned to trust patterns more than feelings. The pattern here was obvious. Fuel economy was down nearly 30%, with zero drivability symptoms. 30% was the clear signal. I plugged in the scan tool not to look for trouble codes, but to watch behavior. That is the difference between guessing and knowing. Most drivers think sensors either work or fail. That is not how modern engines operate. Sensors age, they slow down, they drift, and when they do not break the engine. They quietly reprogram it. The numbers told the story before the car ever did. Fuel trims were elevated. Not enough to trigger a warning, not enough to flag a fault, just enough to show that the engine control unit was constantly adding fuel to compensate for something it believed was wrong. The computer thought the engine was running lean. It was not, but the sensor was convincing it otherwise. This is where most people get lost. They assume fuel economy is controlled by engine size, driving style, or aerodynamics. That might have been true 20 years ago. Today, fuel economy lives and dies by sensor data. And there is one sensor that has more authority than almost any other. When it lies, the engine listens. Inside your exhaust system, where temperatures swing wildly and soot builds up over time, a small component decides how rich or lean your engine runs. It measures oxygen content in the exhaust and reports back to the computer dozens of times per second. The computer trusts it completely. If the sensor says the engine is running lean, the computer adds fuel. If it says the engine is rich, fuel is pulled back. That constant adjustment is what keeps modern engines efficient. But when that sensor slows down or becomes contaminated, it stops telling the truth. It lags behind reality. The engine control unit does not know that. All it sees is delayed or inaccurate data, so it responds the only way it knows how, by adding more fuel to protect the engine. From the driver's seat, everything feels normal. From the exhaust pipe, fuel is being wasted non-stop. I watched the driver study the live data, and he finally asked the question everyone asks. So what's wrong with it? I told him nothing mechanical was failing. No parts were broken, no cylinders were misfiring. That made him more confused. If nothing was broken, how could fuel disappear so fast? That's when I explained the uncomfortable truth. Your engine does not decide how much fuel to burn. A computer does. And that computer is only as smart as the sensor it trusts the most. When that sensor drifts, your engine becomes incredibly inefficient while feeling perfectly healthy. This is why drivers replace spark plugs, clean throttle bodies, and chase phantom problems without ever fixing the real issue. They are working on parts that respond to commands, not the part that gives the command. What makes this worse is that this sensor often fails slowly, so slowly that drivers adapt without realizing it. They fill up a little more often. They blame traffic. They blame seasons. They blame fuel quality. Meanwhile, the sensor keeps lying and the engine keeps obeying. As the scan tool continued logging data, the pattern became undeniable. Slow response, delayed switching, a lazy signal that looks harmless unless you know what you are looking for. To most people, the numbers would look normal. To a mechanic, it was a confession. This is the moment where the mystery finally gets a face. One sensor, one decision point, one silent authority controlling your fuel economy without your permission. And the most frustrating part is this. Once you know what to look for, you will start seeing it everywhere. Cars that just do not get the mileage they used to. Engines that run smooth but feel expensive. Drivers who do everything right and still lose at the pump. In the next part, I am going to break down exactly how this sensor works, why it fails without warning, and how to tell if it is the reason your fuel gauge is dropping faster than it should. Because once you understand how this one sensor thinks, you will never look at your fuel economy the same way again. By the time most drivers start to suspect something is wrong, the damage is already done. That is what makes this sensor so dangerous. It does not fail loudly. It does not break in a way that strands you on the side of the road. It fails politely, quietly, in a way that convinces the engine to keep running smoothly while silently wasting fuel every second you drive. Here is where the illusion begins. Modern engines do not run on feel. They run on data. The engine control unit does not care how the car feels to you. It only cares about numbers, air mass, exhaust oxygen, temperature, load. And at the center of that decision-making process sits one sensor whose entire job is to tell the ECU whether combustion was clean or not. That sensor lives in the exhaust stream downstream from the fire, where it measures what is left after fuel burns. When everything is healthy, this sensor behaves like a heartbeat. It swings rapidly between rich and lean, dozens of times per second. That constant oscillation tells the computer the engine is breathing correctly. The ECU, the engine control unit, responds by keeping fuel delivery tight, efficient, and balanced. That's when miles per gallon stays high and emissions stay low. But sensors don't die suddenly. They age, they get coated, they slow down, and when this sensor slows, it starts lying without realizing it. As it ages, its response time increases. Instead of reporting changes instantly, it lags. That lag is critical. The ECU, the engine control unit, sees a slow response and interprets it as a lean condition. Not because the engine is actually lean, but because the feedback is delayed. The computer doesn't know the sensor is tired. It trusts the sensor completely, so the ECU reacts the only way it knows how. It adds fuel. Not enough to cause misfires, not enough to trigger a warning light, just enough to be safe. And safe, in engine control unit logic, always means rich. Rich keeps combustion stable. Rich prevents knock. Rich protects components. But rich also destroys fuel economy. This is where fuel trims tell the real story. Fuel trims are the engine control unit's correction factor. They are the computer admitting it has to compensate. When trims creep upward, it means the engine control unit is constantly adding fuel to correct something it believes is wrong. Drivers never see this. The car still accelerates smoothly. Idle stays steady. Throttle response feels normal. The only thing changing is how fast the gas needle moves. I have seen cars losing 30% fuel economy while driving perfectly. No hesitation, no codes, no rough starts. Because the ECU is doing its job too well. It is masking the failure. And here is the part that catches people off guard. The check engine light is not your friend in this situation. It is the last thing to respond. This sensor can be inaccurate for months, sometimes years, before it fails badly enough to trip a fault. As long as it stays within a plausible range, the ECU keeps trusting it. That is why drivers blame everything else: fuel quality, weather, tire pressure, driving habits, anything except the invisible device buried in the exhaust. Meanwhile, the consequences stack up quietly. Rich mixtures burn hotter in the exhaust. Catalytic converters work overtime. Carbon accumulates on valves and pistons. Oil contamination increases as unburned fuel washes past the rings. Spark plugs foul sooner. The engine is not just wasting fuel, it is aging faster. This is also why many drivers replace the wrong parts first. They clean the mass airflow sensor, they replace spark plugs, they run injector cleaner. Sometimes they even replace the catalytic converter. And none of it fixes the miles per gallon problem, because none of it addresses the source of the lie. The LIE comes from one slow signal. What makes this even worse is how modern driving accelerates the failure. Short trips, cold starts, stop-and-go traffic, ethanol fuel. All of it coats this sensor faster than older engines ever did. Moisture and sulfur byproducts bake onto the sensing element. Each heat cycle makes it a little slower. And because the ECU adapts gradually, the driver adapts too. You do not notice the loss because it happens slowly. This is why mechanics don't diagnose this by feel. They diagnose it by behavior, live data, graphs, patterns. A healthy sensor switches fast. A dying one drags its feet. When you graph it, the difference is obvious. One looks like a heartbeat. The other looks like a flat line with occasional twitches. And once you see that graph, everything makes sense. The high fuel trims, the disappearing miles per gallon, the rich exhaust smell you didn't notice until someone pointed it out. The engine that feels fine, but costs more every week to drive. This is the moment where the mystery becomes mechanical instead of emotional. It is no longer about guessing. It is about understanding that your engine has been making decisions based on bad information. And until that information is corrected, no amount of driving style changes will save fuel. But knowing this is only half the battle. Understanding why the sensor lies does not help unless you know how to catch it in the act. That is where most drivers stop. They assume testing requires expensive equipment or a shop visit. It does not. The real breakthrough comes when you stop asking how the car feels and start watching what the engine believes. That is where the truth finally shows itself. By the time most drivers reach this point in the story, they already feel uneasy. They start to realize this was not a rare failure, not a fluke, not bad fuel from one station. It was a system doing exactly what it was told to do, based on bad information. The most dangerous part is that the engine feels fine while it is happening. This is where everything comes together. When that one sensor starts lying, the engine control unit does not panic. It does not shut the car down. It does not flash a warning light right away. It adapts. Modern engine control units are brilliant at hiding problems. They stretch fuel trims. They adjust timing. They soften throttle response. They quietly add fuel in places you will never notice unless you are watching the data. The goal is not efficiency, it is smoothness. And smoothness is what tricks drivers into thinking nothing is wrong. That is why people drive for months, sometimes years, wasting fuel without realizing it. The car still starts. It still idles smoothly. It still pulls onto the highway without drama. Meanwhile, the engine control unit is dumping extra fuel every second just to compensate for a signal it no longer trusts. Your miles per gallon drops. Your exhaust runs richer. Carbon builds invisibly. And the sensor that caused it all never triggers a code because it has not failed enough. This is the silent failure zone, and it is where most engines live before something expensive breaks. Once you understand that, the fix stops feeling mysterious. You do not chase injectors. You do not blame fuel brands. You do not replace parts blindly. You test the sensor directly, not with guesses, but with data. This is where mechanics see the truth and drivers usually do not. A scan tool plugged in, engine fully warmed up, live data on the screen. A healthy sensor switches rapidly, from lean to rich, rich to lean, multiple times per second. It looks alive, responsive, honest. A tired sensor moves slowly. It lags. It sticks. It hesitates. Sometimes it flatlines just long enough for the engine control unit to overcorrect. That delay is all it takes to waste fuel. And here is the part most people never expect. The engine often runs better after the fix than it has in years. Not louder, not rougher, better. Throttle response sharpens, idle steadies. Fuel trims settle back towards zero. The exhaust smell cleans up. The engine stops fighting itself. It finally breathes the way it was designed to. I have watched this happen hundreds of times. Cars that owners swore were just getting old suddenly feel lighter, quieter, more willing. Not because something new was added, but because something dishonest was removed. Replacing the sensor is not complicated. Let the exhaust cool. Use the correct socket. Take your time. Install a quality replacement, not the cheapest one on the shelf. This is not the place to gamble. Cheap sensors often fail early or respond too slowly right out of the box. OEM-grade parts exist for a reason. They switch fast. They survive heat. They tell the truth. Once installed, the real magic happens over the next few drives. The engine control unit relearns. Fuel trims reset. The engine stops compensating for a problem that no longer exists. Fuel economy in miles per gallon recovers gradually, then consistently. And for the first time in a long time, your fuel gauge starts behaving the way it used to. But there's one final truth that matters more than the fix itself. This sensor did not fail overnight. It drifted, slowly, quietly, mile after mile. And unless you know what to watch for, it will happen again. That is why prevention matters. Clean air filters. Fix vacuum leaks. Use quality fuel. Occasional cleaning of the mass airflow sensor. These small habits protect the signal the engine control unit depends on. Ignore them, and the cycle repeats. Most drivers never learn this. They blame age, weather, traffic, and fuel prices. They never realize one tiny sensor decided how much fuel they wasted every day. You're not most drivers anymore. You've seen how efficiency really disappears. You understand why the car felt normal while your wallet emptied faster. And you now know exactly where to look before replacing anything else. So before you click away, think about this. How long has your fuel economy been dropping without explanation? Drop a comment and tell me. And if you want more hidden fixes, real diagnostics, and the kind of knowledge shops rarely explain, make sure you subscribe. Because the next video exposes another silent system that costs drivers thousands before they ever feel a thing.